Good morning. I'm Charmion McKusick, being interviewed on the 12th of October 2021 in my home. In Globe, Arizona. In Globe, Arizona. In Globe, Arizona. People generally want to know how I got here, and that is sort of a long story, which starts when I was 4 years old. At that point, I was collecting minerals, and then fossils, and then shells, and then bone, and that blew my mother's mind. I was the bane of her existence. I dawdled. I daydreamed. I snippled, worst of all. But then when I started dragging in bones, it was too much for her. I was regularly threatened to be sent to reform school. So my father, being of more liberal inclinations, built a concealed doorway into a trunk room off my bedroom. And it was the perfect answer. I could go in there with all my collections in glass cases where I could see them. I had a table, I had a chair in front of a window with a robin's nest on the sill. And that was where I spent my formative years out of my mother's sight. People say, how can you sit forever and ever in a corner with your face to the wall? I do just fine sitting in a corner with a face to the wall. But as time progressed, in those days children could go places by themselves. I could get a city bus when I was 7, and I could go downtown to the library. When I was a little older, like in junior high school, I could go down to the electric train station and get on a car on the siding and go to the Chicago Natural History Museum and Shedd Aquarium and Hayden Planetarium. It would take us right, the train from Milwaukee came right by and picked us up and took us to the Loop. So I had a lot of opportunities to do things on my own that children now don't have. But I found in the library a section on adventure people and archaeologists and zoologists and baby in his bathysphere, things like that, wonderful stories. And then I discovered Romer's Comparative Vertebrate Anatomy. And I took it out, and I renewed it. And then I renewed it again, and then I had to take it back. In a week, I went down, it was there. I took it out, I renewed it, and this sequence went on for years. I knew the bones of everything under the sun, just right down the line. And of course, the Chicago Natural History Museum had world archaeology. And I could roam everywhere and learn world archaeology. And I got interested in junior high school in iconography. And so one thing led to another. And at the time it came for me to go away to school, the logical choice was anthropology, but there were only 2 choices. There was Harvard, which didn't accept women students, or there was the University of Arizona. But then along came a flood of people coming back from the wars, and there was no room. The year I went to Arizona, my father, I was second choice, I was going to go to Chicago Art Institute, which I could have commuted on the train easily, and would have had a wonderful world in commercial art and been complete happy. But my father thought that art was not the way to make a living, and it turned out he supported my research with art for my whole life. But that's how things work out. Anyhow, he put me on the train for Arizona saying, "Don't come back." And so I think I came back once for a summer, or twice for a summer, but that was it. By then I was married and had my own life. When I arrived, I found that there were only 3 women students from out of state accepted at the university that year because there was such a glut of returning warriors. There was no room for anybody. And one was Priscilla Borer, the ethnobotanist, and she said the other one was a lady who started Sesame Street. So it was a strange combination. Priscilla Borer and George Catnack and I met in Anthro 101. And it turns out that Priscilla had grown up in Mount Prospect, 30 miles inland from where I grew up in Waukegan, Illinois. And, well, I was self-taught. I didn't get dolls. They were graven images, but I got books, and I got stacks of books for Christmas, and I got stacks of books for birthdays, and they were generally anthropology books. So I was thoroughly self-taught on my own hook. Priscilla, on the other hand, went to 2 field schools through the Girl Scouts before she went to college and knew absolutely everybody who was anybody in archaeology. And George Catnack was a returning student coming back from the wars. So the 3 of us were sort of together. But there was a difference. Priscilla and George were known quantities. And I was just somebody who happened in because of good grades. The answer department at that time, I have come to realize, had career paths. And because of their prerequisites, George and Priscilla were obviously on career paths, whereas I wasn't. The people who were on career paths were addressed cordially by their own name. They were given opportunities. They were steered into employment. And the rest of us were chopped liver. We could sink or swim on our own hook. And not being a person who was very mousy, I clawed my way tooth and nail through the anthropology department to get out the other end. And when Priscilla and George and I were standing in the line for graduation, a little gray-haired lady ran up to us and pinned 5 pins on our gowns, and we didn't know who she was. How she knew who we were, I have no idea, but we marched off and graduated together. And then when we came back to the tables to lay aside our gowns, Priscilla and George walked off chatting about what they were doing in the summer without even saying goodbye, and there I was left standing with all my big stack of ironers like chaff in the wind, just gone. It was just like jumping off a cliff. I had nowhere to go. There was no future. So after graduation, I had to make a living. I worked in the pottery for a lifetime, raised 3 children, and got them through college. But in the interim, when Kathleen, my eldest daughter, was 12, we had enough time in the afternoons so that she and I could go over to Gila Pueblo, where the Southwest Archaeological and Conservation Center was lodged, and do volunteer work for Lyndon Hargrave. Now, the reason I got in there was because in 1963, I had illustrated Shelling in the Sea of Cortez for Paul Violette, a dear friend, and gone down to the shore and done all of the things that you do to illustrate a book. And the book was published by Dale Stewart King. And after I got done with that, I went in as an editorial assistant and illustrated the ethnozoology for the warrior Apache. And that's where I got shoved off into Hargrave's venue because the Kings moved to Tucson. And so here I was drawing pictures of things. And Gila Pueblo's purpose at that time was to take in the things that this ruin stabilization unit excavated, fixing ruins so they didn't fall down. And that resulted in bones and other things that were cataloged and studied there and identified, so to go into the report. And it was also an introduction for young PhDs to be taught useful skills. They'd been in school so long that they had lost track of some useful skills. Things like shutting yourself on the right side of a Mormon gate. Now, this is difficult for people the first time they see one, but we had to teach them these things. On the other hand, it was a facility for people who were ready to retire to be taken in and not allowed to retire until they had gotten their reports written. And this is where Lyndon Hargrave came in. We had known him and Beth because they had a motel in Benson and she had a gift shop, and they bought tile trays and things like that from us for their gift shop. So when they moved from Tucson to Globe, and he moved his collection into Gila Pueblo, it took 3 offices to hold it, and across the patio was a room where dead things, stinky dead things, were boiled on a stove to make bones. And so they needed somebody to assist him to get his thoughts down in black and white on paper. And he had a couple of assistants, but they left the Park Service. And Kathleen and I were as volunteers, and we were able to get along with him. And he was extremely elderly at that point. When I went to work as a Park Service employee, or he's even a volunteer, I worked for him as a volunteer. Then I worked for him as contract. Then I worked for him when as a Park Service employee. And when we were working on the macaw book, the Mexican macaws, which came out in 1970, and he would be writing along and he would say, "I'm so tired. Take up the pencil and write." So that's how we got the book written. I'm so tired, so take up the pencil and write. And the most exciting thing about that book was his recognizing that the macaws in room 38 at Pueblo Bonito were different. Their crania were thicker, up and down, deeper than other macaws elsewhere, which meant that they were genetically in a line so long that they drifted. And I think the most fun is that they were raised by special people in a special place for a very long time. And then they've come up with these toe jog sandals because the people were so inbred that they changed too. And they had an extra toe, and they have sandals for these people with extra toes. So they were really busy in their ancestry. But Hargrave, my job for Hargrave was to squeeze the last information out possible. I was handed a circular protractor and told that I was to substantiate in black and white, like on tables and things like that, why his identifications were correct. And there's a problem with birds because birds fly, and they are limited in their anatomy by aerodynamics, and there's only so much difference there can be in the mechanical part of being birds. So in desperation, I'd done the Shellicey Cortez and I'd done the ethnobotany, so I started in drawing the bones. And that resulted in a number of comparative osteologies, slanted toward the layman or the student, so they full size, so they could lay their bone right down in the book and say what it was. And we did the chicken and the grouse, the North American grouse, for Al Schroeder's chickens that he found in an inverted stratigraphy in a Holcomb site. And then, of course, Pakame came along, and we did every single solitary macaw we could borrow, and established 7 characters, which is beyond, if you can get 7 characters at work, it's beyond the probability of like 1 in 10,000 if they're being wrong. So that was meant for, make it simple for everybody, a basis. And then Pakame had macaws, but Pakame also had turkeys. And the turkeys were of 3 sorts. There were some little renty ones, and there were some great big horsey ones, and then there were regular common turkeys like other sites had in the middle. And it was, well, it would be a trimodal curve like that, with the little ones and the middle-sized ones and the higher ones, the big-sized ones. And so this required further research. And Point of Pines had some monstrous big turkeys. And I was working on that to get the macaws, of course, from there for the macaw study. And then along came Al Hayes with all his findings from Gran Quivira. And they had the little bitty runny ones, which they appeared to be raising as a specialty. And you got all 3 at Casas Grandes. You got the little bitty feather-necked ones. You got the great big horsey wild turkey crosses from Point of Pines. And you got the common turkey. So that resulted in prehistoric turkeys of the Southwest. And then later on, I did a thing on goodness, what was that book? Birds of Sacrifice, that was the one it was in. I did a comparative osteology, the bald and golden eagle. That was partly for Las Humanas and Gran Quivira. And then I did another go-round on turkeys, indicating that all of the possible sources of turkeys in the Southwest had been eliminated, except for the eastern wild turkey, Meleagris gallopavus sylvestris. Now, people have the cracked idea that there were wild turkeys running around in the desert that the Indians domesticated. In 1980, we published a series of 3 papers in Hildegard Howard's Festschrift. Stedman did the Pleistocene for the whole of North America. Amadeo did a form called Crossipes, a little bird. The female and the same male were the same size turkeys, which had big feet. And then along came me with the Southwest Indian turkeys. And as the upshot of it was that there were no turkeys in the Southwest in the Pleistocene. There were no turkeys in the Southwest in the Archaic. The only turkeys you get in the Southwest are these little feather-necked runny things which are so frail they can't be wild, they die. That came in with some people who had some new seed corn up the corner, up the side of Arizona and New Mexico to the Four Corners, and inhabited a place where the archaic people had been using it very occasionally. And it was a good place for them. And they specialized in those turkeys. And why do they bring the turkeys? Well, if you've got a certain seed corn, you have to have the songs to sing, and you have to have the birds to sacrifice, and you have to have this whole complex of things that you do to make it grow. So it was a very fine unit. It worked. And that was like 200-300 BC. And everything went along peacefully. And then in the late 500s, you have in northern New Mexico a group of plains woodlands people, skeletal, artifactual, housing, typical plains woodland people come in with what became the common turkey in the Southwest. And bones would be a large Indian domestic. Now, it drove me crazy because why? Just why? And people always give me books, and my sister-in-law gave me a wonderful book in 1999 when it came out, called Catastrophe. And it happens that in 535, lasting into 536, Proto-Krakatoa blew sky high in Southeast Asia, separating Java from Sumatra. It was recorded in history worldwide. It's recorded in the ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica. It's recorded in the fall of civilizations. The Romans describe it as the sun only being seen for 4 hours a day, and then it appeared like the moon, which meant cold, and it meant plague, and it meant famine, and it just wiped out civilizations that existed. The Avar Empire, which was a horse culture on the steppes, went under completely, and the vassals, people who raised cows, moved off and managed to survive in other places, and it started the barbarian hordes going into Europe. And Tikal eventually went over, Teotihuacan went over, and the Nazca people went under. And so you have the big civilizations of that time succumbing to climate change because of a volcano. I think we can begin to understand a little of that, the way things are going now with our storms. It must have been absolutely dreadful and very, very high loss of life. Another thing I'd always wondered was, why did the Mesoamericans have such a paranoid fear of the sun going out that they had to sacrifice thousands of people to tear out their heart and hold it up to feed the sun so it'd come up tomorrow? Now, we think the sun was very likely to come up tomorrow, but they were not at all certain. So they generated a cultural continuum of religion and so forth, and it seeped from there into the Southwest. And so we have, before that period, we have things sort of stable, and then this flow coming up from the south. Now in the Southwest, we have things happen. We have in the last 500 years, ending of the 500, we have these people from plains woodlands coming in off the plains because the grass didn't grow, and taking refuge in northern New Mexico and somehow surviving there with their turkeys. And those turkeys became the predominant form for all Southwestern sites. And the starting of new things in the Southwest is coming along by 600. By 600, those turkeys had gone wild. You do not have turkeys anywhere in the Southwest except in the mountains adjacent to Pueblo sites which had these large Indian domestic turkeys. So that was one thing. And then another thing I thought of, the bow and arrow comes in. Same time. So if you're doing genealogy, everybody who does genealogy knows you can go back real easy to 600 and then, you don't know whether this person was a son, a grandson, or what, and everything goes fluey. Unless you're royalty, you just have a hard time tracing it. But that was a reorganization of the world in the succeeding centuries after that big blow-up, which just about annihilated us. So this has been really interesting to me, because when Hargrave moved off to Prescott College, and I was working birds in the morning, and for Tommy Matthews I was working mammals in the afternoon, I had all of these things coming through from the entire Southwest, different sites and different areas and different altitudes. And I got to see all those wonderful collections and hold the bones in my hand. And then when the Park Service moved off to Tucson, I was left with the Park Service collection and continued doing contract work in the lab. And then when the Park Service collection was moved off to Tucson eventually, I had my own collection by that time and continued working. So it's just been one thing leading to another, but the same research questions hanging on. I taught world archaeology after the Park Service left. I taught North American archaeology. I taught Southwestern archaeology, Southwest pottery making, Indian American culture, Mexican American culture, as well as the basic physical anthro, cultural anthro, and archaeology 101. And one year they had me teaching 19 hours. That was awful. The whole point of it was that I had like 35 people in my class. And I had people coming back. The first people I had were the folks who had gone to the war and were on the GI Bill, and they got $500 a month for going to school. But the reason they were in the war is because they'd gotten into trouble and the judge had sent them to the military instead of to jail. And a lot of them were functionally illiterate. And the classes I was teaching required reading logs, like they were regular people who could read. And so, and there was no library, of course, at all. It was just the Gila Pueblo's building, and I didn't even have enough chairs for my students. And if I didn't have enough chairs, I'd go down the main hall. Like, you don't see me, these are not the droids you're looking for. And snatch a chair that was not occupied and run back to my class. And one time we ended up with some kind of a snafu where we were all sitting on the floor of the main hall for our 3-hour lecture. But we didn't let it stop us. That's how you get a college going. It took 3 times, but it's going now, 3 tries. And the reason that I taught so many hours was my classes would have all of these young men and not much in the way of anything. So I brought books from home, the big lifetime books, things like that, with clear captions and big pictures so they could do their work. And we got through it all right. And they came in, they were fair and trembling. They never succeeded in school. They didn't know what to do. And I said, don't worry about it. That's my job to worry about. You just come to class and do what I tell you, and it'll all work out. And you'll find that learning is fun and easy. And I found out it was fun and easy. Then I had another group, all these young ladies. They were sitting there like this, the first class. I said, what is the matter? And they said, we're nursing students, and if we don't get a B, we're out of the nursing students. I said, oh my goodness. Learning is easy. I will get you through it. Don't worry about it. You'll have fun. You'll come out with your class. Most of them made an A. And it's a lot of the trouble with teaching is what the students have in their head before they get to you. But teaching gave me a broad perspective, which has helped my research so much over the years. Because archaeology is given that it's provincial. And they say Southwest archaeologists are the most provincial of all. And you ask an archaeologist, did you ever hear of the eruption of Proto-Krakatoa? No, I've never found a single solitary one, unless they're here present. And they had no idea what's going on in the rest of North America at the same time. And that's important. What else? The continent. And what's going on in Mesoamerica. And why things mattered to them. But it's been an interesting journey. Now it's had sort of stages as we went along. First we had these luminaries. Then we had hypotheses. Then I build models. I gather all the data I can get from everywhere and put it in my head. And then it'll wake me up in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning with a complete thought. And then I can take that thought and I can build a model. And if this model doesn't work, there's nothing wrong with that. The model doesn't have to work because you haven't got the information again. And then something will come out like the Davis Ranch site. Oh my goodness, what a wonderful book. How that piece strings together. The puzzle is beginning to get enough pieces that we can see. And how can you spend your life in the Valley of Dry Bones? I think it's been an endorphin trip for me because it's every bone that you take out of the package is an exciting new bone. And you get it identified and you write it down and you put it away and it's reported on. And then you got the next bag that you can open. And the most fun bags that I ever opened were the ones that Pepper had put the Pueblo Bonito macaws in. Had never been opened until the day I opened them. It's just amazing, the things that came along. You have fads. When computers came in, Bill Longacre had a bunch of us ancillary people up to Grasshopper for a meeting to see what new science, dendrochronology, climate science, all the things that people were doing, flotation, pollen analysis, and so forth, so that all of us could sit down and talk together. And he said to me, very proudly, we are storing all of our data in computers. And I could have torn my hair out. Because in the Park Service, there were no luminaries, there was just data. You got it down accurately, and it was there forever for everybody. And Eric Reed had started a faunal file of cards this big in a box, an agate box, and it had each species, and under it, it had the sites that it was identified from. And then Lyndon Hargrave came along, and he had little cards, 3 of them, identical, one for species, one for number, and one for site. So you could take them out of the file and deal them any way you wanted. And that was just terrific, or several sites at once. Now, if I'm working on research now in the computer room, I'm not looking at stuff on the computer. I'm looking at books laid out on the bed across from the computer, all open to the same subject, so that I can look back and forth and compare things. And it's a sort of a strange way of doing research, but for me it works, and it's a lot of fun. And after we got done being horrified of having gone from the really maneuverable Eric Reed file and Lyndon Hargrave file, they put the grasshopper stuff into a database, and then the whole world was okay again. You could find things, you could manipulate them, you could deal cards any way you wanted to. And then we had archaeology as anthropology. And then we got into all of these isotope things, which are fascinating, and all these DNA things, which are fascinating. And this is where I get stumped with the provinciality of it. I just read an article in Kiva about how DNA studies indicated that the turkeys in the Southwest might be descended from Sylvestris. The only trouble was in 2001, I'd already published it with comparative osteology, that it could only be descended from Sylvestris. And that making vaporous statements, generalities about domestication of wild turkeys in the Southwest. And I thought, oh dear, I'm not going to die of old age, I'm going to die of despair, because it was in 1980 that we published the things about how there were no turkeys in the Southwest until man brought them in already domesticated. And so we keep going over and over because we're provincial, and I feel that the institutions of higher learning are failing their students in not giving them the basics. They give them a little specialty, but they don't give them the big picture. They don't give them world archaeology. They don't give them North American archaeology. They don't give them the basics for their field so that they can have a place in time and space to where they can do their research. As far as mentors go, I learned avian identification under Lyndon Hargrave, and I learned mammal identification under Thomas W. Matthews. And as far as college goes, because I wasn't on a career path, my mentor was, thank goodness, Clara Lee Tanner. Clara Lee taught the most awful world archaeology class. She had these big cards, and I swear she'd been reading off the same things since 1928. And she hated the class, and we hated the class, but we suffered through it together. When that was a sophomore class, I started taking upper division classes in my sophomore year, and the university didn't offer any specialties except for her. And I took every single solitary, ethnography, religion, art class that she taught in rotation. Every time a rotation came around, I took one. And it was the funniest thing. In 1951, when they brought the Gladwin collection to the Arizona State Museum, they had an open house to show off all these wonderful big Holcomb jars, things like that, you know, fun things, gaudy things, things you get money for, get donors. And Bob and I, my husband, Robert McKusick were muddling around, and he was looking at one thing and I was looking at another. And Clara Lee came running up to me and she said, "I've got someone you have to meet." And so she took me by the arm and dragged me over where Bob's was. And she said, "This is Robert McKusick." And I said, "But we're already married." You know, she said, "Oh, you rascals." I got off the Golden State Limited at 7 in the morning in September, I think, 9th in 1949. And at the freshman mixer, I met Bob at 7 in the evening, and the rest is history. So she was a little late. But it was such fun, and she was such a dear person. And the best part of it was, because I was taking all these courses, she got me a stack permit. And she let me use her cubicle. And things I was using, a big bowl of things, you know, I never could have seen otherwise. And it was just like going back to the library in Waukegan, Illinois, and getting out Romer's Comparative Vertebrate Anatomy. I had the run of the University of Arizona's library. And we lived, at that time, we were living out at DeGrazia's Mission. And Bob would bring me into town and drop me at school. And later on, she became my honors professor. So she would come in, I would come in, and Bob would drop me off at her house on River Road. And I would sit and go over everything I'd written that week with her. And John would cook her breakfast. And after she got her breakfast eaten, then we would go off to class. And I lived in the reserve reading room because I didn't live on campus anymore because I was married. Or I lived in the stacks, or I lived in the typing room. And it was a fortunate thing. It was a very fortunate thing, because I could never have gotten through Ned Danson's Southwest Archaeology without it. He has signed 3 site reports to read every week. There were no books then, you know. There weren't any. We didn't have any textbooks for anything, beginning to end. Well, I guess we had something for social anthropology in senior year, but the rest of it was just the lecture. So I could never have gotten a hold of them. I never could have. I skimmed 3 of them every week, and it was really hard, but I never could have gotten it done without it. And I don't know what everybody else did. I don't know how they got a hold of them. I don't know if they did it. But we all got through. It was just a battle to get through the anthropology department, just a tooth and nail battle. Another mentor was Molly Thompson. Howie put me over on a cowboy well and had me dig a ditch through it, 1 meter wide and 6 feet deep. And of course, you know, when you got down to the bottom of it, it was mucky, and a piece of muck stung. I was throwing up 6 feet and then over on the top of the dirt pile. You know how that goes. And a piece of muck stuck to my shovel, and it wrenched my back so badly that the doctor said I couldn't go anymore. And Howie put me in the room with the lab of Molly Thompson for the rest of the 10 days or so of the summer. And Molly had all of these things which were brought in, which had to be drawn on cards and recorded and packed up and shipped up, be ready to ship out the whole thing. And it was a lot of stuff that was coming in. And so I sit at a table, and she would set an object in front of me, and I would draw it on the card as fast as I could, and then she set another one down. So it was drawing that got me through it. It was drawing that got me through it. The only skill I left the university with was scientific illustration, which I had been taught in Zoology 101. That's the only saleable skill I had when I came out, just nothing, just nothing. And I admired Molly. She taught me so much, and she taught me how to get things classified and recorded and nail the data down so that it would never be lost and nobody would ever do it again. And so then I went under the Park Service, which is the same thing. No luminaries. The data was what was important. You nail it down, you get it right, you get it recorded, you get it open for the public so that everybody can use it, so that it never has to be done again. So those are the people that were fun. Colleagues, Priscilla Borer, of course, Amadeo Ray, and Gloria Fenner. I worked for Gloria Fenner. I went down to Amherst for a while and worked for her because I found 2 more characters, so I had to go back through the entire macaw collection. Oh, that was funny. I got it all recorded, all on cards, and all put away, all nice. And then Lyndon Hargrave, who was working on contract, wasn't getting paid as fast as he wanted to. So he took them all out. So I had to get them when he was out of the way and go back through and put them all back in. Well, then I discovered on a femur and on the tibia tarsus, I discovered 2 more characters to identify partial skeletons and macaws with, because leg bones are really tough. And so I went down for a week with Gloria, and she fed me, and I said, if you give me a place to sleep and feed me, I'll come and do it. So I did that. And went all the way through it again, 3rd time, and got a lot of the ones that were just are a species identified because of the leg bones. So that was sort of a fun thing. So she became such a good friend. She used to come up every October and we would look at the leaves. She'd spend a weekend with us every October to see the leaves, the first glimpse of fall after the hot desert summer. John Young, of course, John and Karen were over at Gila Pueblo with Alden Hayes. Alden Hayes brought everything from his whole crew from Gran Cavira, and Karen was doing pottery, and John was doing stone, and I was doing bone, bird in the morning and mammal in the afternoon. There was so much bone from Gran Cavira that the Gila Pueblo is a long building. It's a reconstruction of an entire pueblo, and it's got this central hall. And it sorts the bones because government has a very particular way of filing everything so that you can find it. Anybody can find it instantly. If the Raider of the Lost Ark, the Ark of the Covenant, if it were in government storage, could be found instantly. So at the end of the movie, when it moves off into storage, I said, I know where it goes, I can find it. And I went all the way down the hall and all the way back up the other side with bags with bones. Mostly pieces of antelope bone. Apparently they were harvesting antelope and trading dried meat, as well as specializing in the feather-necked turkeys. Those were 2 trade items I was sure they had. Oh, and then they were having the breastplates that you have to trade out under the plains. They made those as a specialty too. Anyhow, I got all of this stuff put in there. And so there was Karen and John Young. There was Jerry Green, who went to work for Tom Matthews in the mammals. And there was Alden Hayes. Oh, what dear person Alden Hayes was. He was just lovely. And he went into the 3 offices that Lyndon Hargrave had vacated, and across the hall across the patio from where I was working. And he and Tommy Matthews would come in and sit on the step with some problem, and we'd hash it out. And it was so stimulating. We did more business, archaeological business, a coffee break, morning and afternoon, than by ourselves probably, because we could get feedback from other people. We could get an idea, and then we could test it out. And he came over one day and he said, "You're religious. I've got this thing. What do you call it?" Well, it was a pre-do, you know, the kneeler for the individual person to have their prayer book and to kneel as they read their prayers. So he'd come over with these funny questions like, "You're religious, what do you call this?" And it was a wonderful, wonderful group of people. There were 23 of us, I think, and just so stimulating and such fun. And Roland Rickert was really stabilization too. And oh, goodness. Well, all those wonderful guys. They were gone all summer, and then they come in the winter, and we enjoy them in the winter and process what they'd brought in the summer. So it was a wonderful experience, and a lot of feedback, a lot of congeniality and collegiality. Gila Pueblo was the main pueblo, and then Hagen's site was a little bit south, and that was an outlier. One of the interesting things in this site was, of course, this area is Beshpagoa, and it's situated at the confluence of Ice House Canyon and Six Shooter Canyon. And it is by far the biggest site because it had more water. Gila Pueblo is upstream, and it is smaller in proportion to the water. And I was reading an article, again in Kiva, I think, about how people who have a limited amount of water get less upset when there's adverse conditions and they don't move away. They just stay there because they know their limitations. And these streams down these canyons radiating out from the Pinal Mountains were steady little streams, and the folks could do ditch irrigation in the bottom of the canyons, and the people were working within their means. Now, the streams are no longer running because the mine broke through and drained the canyons, but for the time they were there, they did very well, and their population was limited by the streams, and therefore it stayed in balance for an unusually long time. And the upland Salado are very interesting to me. They are not at all like the Tondo Basin Salado. The Tondo Basin Salado are like classic Holcomb, post-classic Holcomb. From all the evidence of their projectile points, they were coming over and slaving over here repeatedly. And that's what finally put out Beshpagoa, and finally put out Pinal Pueblo, and finally put out Gila Pueblo. Gila Pueblo lived through 2 of their raids. It lived through an extermination by the people of Beshpagoa, bodies with projectile points in, tell you who did it. It's like crime scene investigation in an archaeological site. At Gila Pueblo, we were lucky we had a ceremonial, 2-story ceremonial redistribution complex, which had 3 destructions, and it all came down like pancakes one on the other. And you could just, I mean, there was no doubt. It was no doubt of anything. Nothing broken up. Just after the last raid, there were closing activities, both at Peshpagoa and at Gila Pueblo, which were the same. So that meant there was somebody left over. They could have gone down to the people in Gila. They could have gone to Zuni. It's hard to say. If looking at iconography, you have the same insignia for Datura, the ball with the spikes, and post-classic Maya, and Aztec, and Mimbres. They were really into Datura. My gosh, most of their paintings are Datura of some sort or other. Then you have the disc with the red and the black line with little spikes at Gila Pueblo, at Kanishpa, at Hawiku. So there are ways that you can follow trains of thought and movements of people. It's being widely having a wide perspective has made all the difference. Yes, you specialize, but in the beginning you have to do the groundwork. You have to learn the basic. You have to go back and find out what people have established, which isn't ever going to change, what data they had. You have to see what is going on in the world in general, in North America in general, in the Southwest in general. Then you can think about your own problem and come up with a coherent answer. The data don't change. Data stay the same, thank goodness. But our interpretation matures as time goes on. Every piece of the puzzle gives you one more piece of the big picture.